by any number of different reasons, such as genetic and others, environmental, and that's true. In fact, a lot of stress is environmental. But few think that it's really an emotional or psychological condition that is really setting the tone and the environment, if you will, for illness, for physical illness, which is treated sometimes with radiation and chemotherapy and any number of different psychiatric medications and the like. And today we have two wonderful individuals who will be exploring this subject with me to uncover any number of different ways of dealing with this thing called stress, and by even drilling down further to some deep existential and even ontological subjects, i.e., why are we alive and what is this thing all about, Alfie? So we can really get to the core of what this life is about and how that affects everything you could say from the core outward, as though we were some kind of nuclear plant or something. And maybe we are, and we'll be exploring all of that today in our roundtable on stress management. There will be some real takeaways for you as we speak with both of our guests, and as well as good books to consult and learn more about, so you can become more empowered in your own personal lives for dealing with stress, because this is something in our contemporary world everyone is facing in one way or another to a greater or lesser extent. So with that, I'd love to welcome you both to the show. Glad to have you both on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to just introduce everybody to you both, and we'll go from there. One of our guests is the author of Learning to Breathe, Priscilla Warner, My Year-Long Quest to Bring Calm to My Life. And Priscilla is a very interesting woman. She used to be an advertising art director for many years, shooting commercials and ads from English muffins to diamond earrings, and I love this line, hyperventilating her way through all the client presentations. Yes, that's an honest statement. And then she co-authored The Faith Club, which became a New York Times bestseller, and was touring the country on book tour for several years, popping different kinds of anti-anxiety drugs along the way before getting on stage in churches, synagogues, mosques, you name it. Her medication was her good friend. But at a certain moment, she decided, while flying in an airplane, that the time had come for her to discover her inner monk. And I like the way you put it. That became then the basis of this book, Learning to Breathe. So, along with Priscilla and myself is Allan Lokos, who is the founder and guiding teacher of the Community Meditation Center here in New York City, in fact, right here on the Upper West Side. He's the author of Patience, The Art of Peaceful Living, and Pocket Peace, Effective Practices for Enlightened Living. He was selected as one of the 10 Buddhist teachers to follow on Twitter. What has happened to our world? Follow a Buddhist teacher on Twitter. I wonder what the Buddha would have thought of that.
I don't know.
It's funny to think about. And he has also, his writing has appeared in the New York Times, Tricycle Magazine, a wonderful Buddhist publication, where he also led a month-long online retreat through that magazine. He's written for the Huffington Post, BeliefNet, Backstage Newspaper, Positively Positive. On it goes. He has taught extensively at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, a Vipassana Center up in Massachusetts, at Columbia University Teachers College, Marymount, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the Rubin Museum. His credentials go far and wide, the Open Center, Tibet House, and on. He's also been a speaker at the Rubin Museum of Art's annual Brainwave event. Oh, I didn't even know it existed. I'm so glad. I want to get my brainwaves resonating with that event. It sounds very good. And he's also taken many classes and has taught with such renowned known teachers as Sharon Salzberg, Thich Nhat Hanh, Joseph Goldstein, and has attended many of the week-long events hosted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So, I started studying Tibetan Buddhism back in the early 80s, quite honestly, with Kala Rinpoche and to some extent His Holiness and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And I'm just laughing at life because Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, there's no such thing as having a spiritual credential.
Nice.
But yet, this is quite a resume, you know. Anyway, thank you both for being here. And,
pleasure.
Really glad to be here.
Thank you.
Priscilla, sure. This book is amusing, it's full of anxiety, and it's also full of peace. How is it that you came to write it? I mean, I know you've had a long history, actually. I mean, what could be called a chronic history of anxiety. And you've tried everything, and you've used a lot of drugs, and you know, you've really put yourself to it. I mean, it's admirable. It's sad that you've had to suffer so much, but it's admirable where you've come with it. Can you just give us a little quick sketch of your past and where it's brought you?
Well, it's a life I had. You know, I didn't know there was another one to be had. So
now you grew up in Providence, Rhode Island.
I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island.
Were your parents anxious?
My father was manic depressive. My mother suffered from depression, which I didn't really realize until I wrote this book and people from her past came into my life in magical ways. My father's twin brother was in and out of mental hospitals all his life, and it was very frightening to me. He was sort of my boogeyman, I say. You know, he had what were called nervous breakdowns that were whispered about behind closed doors. I was named after my father's favorite cousin, Priscilla, who had a breakdown and was schizophrenic and is probably, I don't know if she's alive today, homeless and schizophrenic. And she used to send me letters. She used to pick through the garbage and leave that in letters to me on my mother's doorstep. So I came from this family where there was a lot of pain and suffering, but it wasn't really talked about back then, but I could feel it all around me. So I had my first panic attack when I was 15 years old. I was a waitress at the Brown University cafeteria, trying to meet boys because I went to an all-girls school. And I was hoping they'd notice me, and then when I had this massive panic attack while I was dishing out peas, I was praying nobody noticed me.
Dishing out peas?
I remember it vividly. I was dishing out with
my.
I had a polyester aqua uniform with a little white collar, big spoon, and that just giant industrial trays of peas, and I was dishing out peas to a line of very bored young men, I'm sure, and all of a sudden I felt my heart racing, my throat close up, my extremities tingling, cold sweat, and I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Did you see a guy that you liked?
That's very cute. You're the first one to ask me that. Maybe.
These things happen.
But that wouldn't bode well for the rest of my life, and I did end up having
we'd have
a lovely
to discuss that with your husband.
Yes. No, I don't think it was one particular boy.
Okay.
And in fact, actually...
Maybe it was the stream of them, you know, Brown University, Ivy League.
Well, I've thought about it a lot, and I think that the whole world was coming at me, and that was sort of the most obvious picture of that happening. And there was a part of me that didn't want to break away from the home I grew up in, but here it was in front of me, this dazzling array of possibility. So a therapist said to me years later, you know, panic is a syndrome, so it comes from a variety of factors, and you have to understand panic in you. There's psychological, sociological, and biological. Mm-hmm. And she said, you have to go on, if you're going to go on this quest, you have to figure it out for yourself. So I decided in the back of my mind, I'd had my eyes on these Tibetan monks who were meditating so effectively that their prefrontal cortexes were lighting up on MRIs. And I was touring the country, you know, popping the
I love that image. You know?
Well, I say in the book, you know, they were plumped up like perfectly ripe peaches because, and to me, you know, as a person who, when you have a panic disorder, and 6 million Americans do, and 40 million Americans have an anxiety disorder. So you're always thinking, looking around you and thinking, okay, I'm going to a meeting. What do I have to do? And like, I had a flask filled with vodka, and I would self-medicate with that because it would soothe my lungs.
What is your, do you have Irish blood? I mean, that may sound funny.
No, I don't think so, but my father often was asked if he was Irish. Russian Jews. As Belle Ruth Naperstek, who's my wonderful friend and does beautiful guided imagery, said, you know, we all go back to a shtetl, and, you know, there was all kinds of anxiety and angst, you know, with the pogroms.
I wonder if
my family
belonged to that same shtetl.
We all belong to an original shtetl, I'm sure, and anxiety is, you know, it manifests itself in different ways in different people. I've since spoken to people who said, you know, I had a panic attack, I just didn't know what it was. I didn't call it
Didn't have a name for it.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so that's what your heritage. No, I'm really, look, I'm a therapist and I'm incurable as such. So, I always
feel very comfortable with you.
Oh, good. Just relax. I always just look at the family line to see who's who and what's what, because each thing presents a different
well, my brother, who is also a wonderful writer, says we come from Jewish Gothic. So dark, not a lot of and in the course of writing this book, actually, once I learned how to sit still and how to be with my thoughts, and I learned how to ground myself with some terrific therapies like EMDR and somatic experiencing, then I was able to look at my life and myself in ways that I never could have examined my background before. And to come out on the other side of it with this incredible sense of peacefulness and calm. I had a wonderful Mother's Day, and I was lying next to my husband in bed recently, and I just thought, I could never have imagined that I would have achieved the kind of peace that I've achieved now. Oh. It's a wonderful feeling.
That is. I mean, this has been a lifelong matter for you.
Yeah.
And so
but, a lot
it's like
people,
you've come to the other side of it.
Right. But a lot of people, you wouldn't necessarily know that if you'd known me when I was an art director or when I had several different careers. And a lot of the people who write to me say, nobody would know from the outside, because anxiety can cause you to accomplish a great deal. You can channel so much anxiety into many productive things.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I'd rather live calm. Although once I left my panic behind in this book, I missed it a great deal. I just thought, now what if I am what I set out to be, which is like a serious monk, for God's sake? What happens to my sense of humor, my self-deprecating neurotic charm, I'd like to think of it as.
Yeah.
And when you build an identity for yourself as an anxious person, and then you realize that the flip side of anxiety is a lot of depression, you have to examine.
Look at Woody Allen, and he, I think, who, by the way, is one of my gurus, I have to say. And I'm not anxious. I'm very calm. I mean, I can turn on calm quickly.
Nice.
And I can also rev
Mazel
up.
tov, as my people say.
Thank you. My people will speak to your people. And it's fun. I mean, but I'm not a typical anything. So I don't fit into many categories at all. But I learned fairly early in my life, having started studying yoga when I was 14.
Nice.
Way many years ago, one of the first probably in this country, in relatively recent history, the 60s type of movement. I think I got a handle on how to just drop down and drop in.
Exactly.
And just leave my mind from the ordinary dualistic world. And I always go back, don't get me wrong, but it's like a muscle.
Right. But for an anxious person, that's a frightening concept. To drop out of your life is what's underneath you. What is your safety net? Where do you go when you don't have that adrenaline pumping through your veins? It oddly becomes a comforting presence. It's very strange, but paradoxically, it defines you.
That becomes exactly. Now, you can still be relaxed and enjoy some good Jewish humor.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
good,
definitely.
good.
I'm becoming funnier and funnier as I get more comfortable with being, if I say so myself, as I get more comfortable being calm.
Sure. I mean, it opens up a lot more material for you.
I hope so. But it is interesting because a lot of humor comes from a dark, painful place.
Yeah.
And I really, before I wrote this book, I really enjoyed really raw memoirs that were painful.
That was The Faith Club, correct? I mean,
that was an honest memoir. It wasn't as raw as some of the memoirs that I really admire. I mean, but it was very painful, very direct and very honest.
Yes.
But now it's not like I'm constantly watching Disney movies, but I'm a much lighter individual.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens.
Now, there's a lot of value in what you're saying, I believe, and the whole where humor originates, and one of its main functions, it's a psychosocial function, to relieve stress and tension in an otherwise rather nutty world.
Absolutely.
And so it's highly functional, and it needs to put its finger on difficult moments and points in our daily lives. So it does ride a wave. So we'll
Very
return
well
to
put.
this. Thank you. So thank you for that, and we'll circle back around. I want to just touch base here with Allan, because he's bringing this whole beautiful wave. Allan Lokos's book is called Patience, and I was impatiently leafing through it to prepare for the interview. Can I say that?
Sure.
But in fact, I'll tell you the truth, it actually very much, Allan, slowed me down, if I may say. I really found that you write with a really nice rhythm. And it's kind of a standard Buddhist sequencing of thoughts.
Well, I thought it'd be my musical background, if there's a rhythm to the writing.
Yes, of course, because you were a singer on Broadway.
Yes.
The Pirates of Penzance and...
All the way back to the original company of Oliver.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, that's what people say,
cool.
is somebody who was in the original company of Oliver is still alive. Isn't that amazing?
No, but
Well, I
voice,
was the youngest adult, so...
Okay.
So it's
Shoo.
Yeah, right.
Right, exactly.
Right.
More, please.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I'll never forget.
Exactly.
Actually, my family, we saw it at the Schubert Theater in Chicago. We lived out there briefly before moving back east.
And
it
I
was a
seem to meet
major
hundreds.
piece for my development.
Right. I meet
Yeah.
hundreds of people who tell me, oh, I was Fagin in high school, and I was Nancy in junior high school. So
It's,
it goes
sure.
way back.
your
Sure.
voice wasn't this low when you were that young. Did you
It
have
was
this?
like this.
No, when I was in Oliver, I was an adult. I was a
great
young
voice.
adult, just
Oh,
out of
yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And I was singing I really wanted to sing opera, so
Yeah.
being employed on Broadway, having income, and being able to study at the same time was great.
So, are you a baritone?
I'm probably
As
more
well
bass
as a
baritone.
Buddhist, Buddhist baritone.
A
Bass,
Buddhist
basso
bass.
Buddhist.
A basso Buddhist.
I like it.
Or something like that.
Yeah. Well, you can relax people just with the
Yes.
sound of your voice, It's,
Yeah, someone said they listen to me and they just get so relaxed they can go right to sleep. So, I've done so much teaching and put so many people to sleep. It's quite a resume.
No, it's very comforting.
Good.
Feel very
It is,
comfortable.
it is.
Good.
You must be very comfortable then here, right
I
smack
am.
in
I've got
the
a
middle
psychotherapist
of
and
a
this
therapist and a
amazing
basso
human
Buddhist.
being on the other side of me with his voice. Yes.
This is great.
What a sandwich.
Really?
Nice.
Truly. But to say, I think this is so important a subject, and I feel that you are exploring it, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say here with to our audience of the kind of the quintessential importance of patience. Now, we could say that also about love, but if you don't have patience in love, you're going to have trouble.
Oh, yes.
So there's something truly fundamental in this subject that we all do a bit of a dance around, I would say.
And I was so surprised that this subject really hasn't been explored.
Yeah.
I looked to see what had been written about it. There was, maybe I shouldn't get too specific, but there was one
okay.
slim volume of a wonderful writer who I admire, writing about what his grandmother had taught him about patience. I don't think the book is even 100 pages. But no one seemed to have gone into depth to get a sense of what patience actually is. We have a language that we use with patience that's totally inaccurate. You think about what we say regularly. We say, I've lost my patience. That suggests that patience is some sort of a thing or commodity that you can lose and find.
Yes.
And that's inaccurate. And it's a significant inaccuracy because when we realize that patience and impatience are feelings, then we get a sense of what we can actually do about this. I mean, looking for your patience that you dropped under the sofa is not going to do it.
Right.
But when you realize that impatience is a feeling, and if you start to practice a bit, you both spoke a bit about mindfulness, of which, of course, is a very in word right now, but even if you don't use that word, just a sense of awareness of when you start to feel that little jiggle in your innards, and you'll know when it's happening. You can feel when a conversation is beginning to go in a direction that, gets you a bit edgy, or as we say,
Agitated.
exactly, someone is pushing your buttons. if you look inside, you can feel that. You can feel that feeling arising. Now the question is, what do you do about it? And that's, that's how we explore becoming a more patient person. Indeed. There are steps before that. There are those steps that we were taught when we were children. We were taught, now, just take a deep breath, dear, or count to 10, or count to 100, which is it?
I think 10,
10.
but if you want to go
really
to sleep,
patient, you could count to 100.
Right.
Go to 100.
Actually, one of my students said she taught her son to count to 9. I was just wondering what the psychological implications are going to be for that little fellow.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you see, once you get to the point where you are counting to 10 or gritting your teeth or taking a deep breath, you're already experiencing impatience. You're agitated, you're uncomfortable, you're experiencing distress, stress, all the things that Priscilla is telling us that we really are better off if we don't experience. So how do we back up and get in touch with what's going on? How do we develop some skills and some techniques? That's what I wanted to explore in this book. And there's quite a bit of research involved, but I think I ended up with some actual skills that people can practice. They're not very involved, but you have to want to do them.
Yes.
They're not just going to happen.
You know, I'd like to, in a sense, back up a little bit here, because I see that there, and of course I know because I'm a stress management consultant also, techniques that we can engage that will shift our neurophysiology. You know, we know that. We have things that we can do, and we all know what they are, and we're going to go into it. You could say that's the phenomenological piece of it, that we see, identify a problem, anxiety or agitation, impatience, and then we set about to correct it in the present. Then there's you could say the historical piece, which is tracking this feeling of agitation or anxiety back to its roots and getting some sense, and I was playfully inquiring about your background, but in fact, it's a very important inquiry. So we can begin to see, since we are but an amalgam of our past anyway, some unusual hybrid, it's really interesting to see who we got what tendencies from, whether it's direct ancestral or from our peer group or, environment. And then in that way begin to relax into knowing it was only that. It was only Uncle Bobby. It was only, Murray, And then we can disidentify with it, you could say, and that's not my anxiety. That's not my agitation. I learned that. Just as one piece. Could you speak to that, Allan?
Well, no, I agree. There's, I don't know that we know a whole lot about what's actually inherent within us. But it is interesting, as I was listening to Priscilla and thinking about my own background and that of a number of my teachers. It seems like we all grew up under the same roof.
Really?
My mother died when I was very young. My father was manic depressive and died in the forensic ward as we fortunately stopped him from killing someone, but still spent his last 10 days in the forensic ward.
Don't tell me you're Russian Jewish also.
I shouldn't tell you? Well, if you don't want me to tell you, I won't tell you.
No, of course you
I won't tell
anything.
you. You'll figure it out for yourself.
I'm getting concerned about my mishbucha,
That's right. Well, just tangent for a moment, that the Buddhist teachings that were brought here to the West were essentially brought by Jewish people. Just think of the names.
No accident.
Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein. You don't think he was born Ram Das, do you? Nor Krishna Das.
Dr. Albert,
I mean,
of course.
I love KD, but he wasn't born Krishna Das.
I'm very aware of that.
Is this all coincidental?
Not at all.
Right.
Look at a Jew in the lotus.
Right.
And absolutely. That's why we've termed the phrase Buddhish.
Right, or Jubu. So what did I do? I went and pursued a profession that is laden with anxiety, getting up on the stage in front of thousands of people.
Exactly, I wanted to ask about that.
Auditioning. where you're sure everybody hates you, but they'll hire somebody. They're going to hire somebody.
Terrible.
Might as well be me. But I was fairly fortunate in doing that. And as I look back, of course I wasn't aware of it then, but auditions are very nerve-wracking. Opening nights are nerve-wracking. But you do 3 years worth of one Broadway show. It doesn't take that long before you become comfortable. But there is that background. Now, to live under the roof with my father had to really be something where I was taught about impatience. I mean, I don't remember ever having a conversation, and I'll identify a conversation as being one person says one sentence and another person says another sentence, and I'll call just that a conversation. Never happened. When my father spoke, you didn't answer. So coming from that, and then reaching a place where I would say I feel very calm, comfortable, every moment of every day? No, not at all. I don't think that's realistic. But being able to handle what the Buddhists love to call the vicissitudes of life, gain and loss, praise and blame, or just essentially the ups and downs.
Sure. The duality of it all.
Yeah, exactly. And bring that not to some baseline that never changes, an equanimous state that you lock into. That would be
mediocrity.
Right.
No, that is not it.
Priscilla was alluding to something that would just be dull and uninteresting. And I don't think that qualities like compassion, patience, love, I don't think these are characterized by passivity. I think they're all vital and alive and energetic, and I think they're the real stuff of life. The other stuff that's so grounded in stress and turmoil, that's kind of the stuff that we want to get away from and to let go.
Yes.
How to do it, of course, is a matter of, actually, unfortunately, it's really a matter of each individual journey. We have, we have programs, mindfulness-based stress reduction. All of us are involved. We are anyway involved in programs that can be very helpful. But the Buddha made it very clear at the end of his life. He said, "I've worked this out for myself. You have to work it out for yourself." Here are some suggestions based on what I've learned. But don't do any of this because I say so. You have to try this for yourself.
That's a real teacher. I spent this weekend, as you were teaching this weekend, I was taking a workshop with a former Buddhist monk named Yasuhiko Genku Kimura. And he teaches something called authentic thinking. It was fascinating. And I've known, Yasuhiko for some years, and we've been friends, and he's been on the TV show as well. And, just looking at the whole subject of thinking from a Buddhist point of view is interesting because it's never thought to be a subject. We're supposed to, even though mindful, leave alone the thoughts. Here is a former Buddhist monk saying, let's think authentically from our deepest self, because thoughts and thinking are one of the great gifts of life. And when he entered the monastery at age 17 or 18, I believe it was, his Zen teacher said to him, "This is all about questions. It's all an inquiry.
Yes.
I know nothing. Don't come to me with questions for answers from me, but you can come to me with your questions, and if you have any good answers, please tell me."
Well, here's a question for both of you that I found interesting. This was my initial research to learn something about patience. I asked several thousand people by questionnaire 2 questions. The first was, under what circumstances do you tend to lose your patience, and what do you do about it? So, what do you think was by far the number one answer that people sent back to me? under what circumstances do you tend to lose your patience? Or you can say for yourself. What
I was going to say either waiting in line or Verizon.
I was going to say the post office or driving.
Well, interestingly, that each of those answers, I think, is a manifestation of the main answer, kind of a tributary. What people said most was, I tend to lose my patience
with loved ones
when I feel I'm not being heard. Or by extension, when I feel I'm not being seen.
Yes.
So what is it that you think is really happening when you're waiting online, or when you're waiting in traffic? After all, if you're in your car, if all those drivers in front of you realized you were there, they'd all get out of the way, wouldn't they?
Surely.
But right, because after all,
You're so special.
I am the center of the universe. Now they don't. I have to wait in this line. I have to wait for Verizon. I have to wait online at the supermarket.
Exactly.
But really, I thought it was extraordinary.
Not being heard or seen.
When I feel I'm not being heard.
Yeah.
Which is really, underneath that is I'm not being acknowledged.
Absolutely. And then also people said, now this is the one I think that we can do something about. I tend to lose my patience when I'm hungry. Well, this isn't rocket science. Guess what you could do about that?
Eat.
Or
tired.
I lose my patience exactly when I'm tired.
Yeah.
Now we can do two things. We can get a little bit more rest, or we can bring a sense of awareness or mindfulness to the fact that I'm tired. I'm entering into this important meeting with the managers and the bosses, and I'm a little tired. Maybe I need to be more alert and aware.
So, in other words, acknowledging one's state for what it is the first step in either developing patience, but certainly reducing anxiety and coming to a state of greater balance and center.
I would say absolutely.
Could you speak to
Except,
that?
I would say, as an anxious person.
Yes.
It was very hard. The first retreat I went to with Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche was a fantastic teacher.
Yeah, I love him.
Who had panic attacks as a child. So
Yes.
he was in my heart right from the beginning.
Tibetan Buddhist monk.
Yes.
Yes.
He was
Interesting.
my man.
That's something
I
no
mean,
one thinks about, right?
Right. And when he
Yeah.
first described at the retreat that I went to, his panic attacks, and he said, I grew up in the Himalayas, beautiful mountains, blue skies, lovely parents, and still panic followed me like a shadow. Tears just ran down my cheeks. When you were talking about your background, I could cry. There's so much pain and suffering in the world, but I had such an affinity for this man who had suffered the way I'd suffered in a completely different life. But he talked about meditating on your panic and meditating on emotions. And as a really panicky person who was popping Klonopin at the ex-monastery while I was at the retreat and calling my husband and whispering, saying, what have I gotten myself into? I'd already cashed the check for the book, for the advance. Was this harebrained scheme going to work? The notion of sitting with my feelings was absolutely terrifying. So for me, what was a terrific combination of healing in my book were these body-based therapies like Traeger therapy, somatic experiencing, and EMDR, where you, in the hands of a skilled therapist, you learn how to literally sit with those feelings and to discharge the unpleasant sensations, physical sensations that have been percolating in your body, in my case, for decades. I couldn't sit there and say, you're anxious. I needed to feel where I was anxious in every part of my body. These therapies help you to slow everything way down so that you literally reprocess them. Bilateral stimulation of the left and right side of your brain, which is EMDR therapy,
sure.
which releases. It's just like somebody touched a little grain of sand in my brain.
Sort of like Western acupuncture.
Yeah. It's a mysterious miracle to me. But it wasn't, I couldn't sit still with those really difficult feelings. And I'd love for you to tell how you help people to do that.
Well, I also sat with Mingyur Rinpoche. It was wonderful, and he was very young when I sat with him. He still is young. And what you said, Priscilla, is really significant. He said, there I was in the peaceful Himalayas, beautiful surroundings, and as you know, he comes from a family of great teachers. And what we see from that, it is not about what's going on around us. We think it is. We look at the person who was rude, who was abusive, who was obnoxious, and we say, Now if that person didn't do that, then I would be much more calm, I would be patient, I wouldn't go through anxiety. But what we see is it's not that. The only place our anxiety can exist is within us. The only place my impatience can exist is within me. Doesn't matter my efforts to change you and what you have said that triggers perhaps this impatience is totally irrelevant. If I'm going to become more patient, if I'm going to reduce stress, that's all done within me. And that's the first step. I actually start the first exercise that I ask people to do in this book is to sit down and ask themselves, and I ask them to do this for a week, just 5 minutes a day. Why do you want to do the work to become a more patient person? And essentially, don't pay attention to your first answers because they're going to be the surfacey one. My wife wants me to. The guys at the office say I'm impatient. That's not your reason. Those are other people's reasons. When you start to come to your reasons for wanting to become more patient, they're going to have some sting to them. They're not going to feel so good. Mm-hmm. They're going to be when you remember that 2 days ago you really snapped at your 4-year-old and you could see how frightened he became. And what did he do? He did what 4-year-olds do. Tell him that he mustn't do that. We don't do that. It's not safe. It's not proper. But when you realize that you've gone so far beyond that with your impatience, and that stings and it has a little burn to it, then you're beginning to develop the motivation that's going to be necessary when you just don't have the determination to deal with the fact that you slip up. And we do slip up. And that's painful.
Of course, it's very human.
Yeah.
There are so many approaches, and I so appreciate what you're saying there. We can also look at the whole idea of extinguishing a behavior that we learned, because on some level, somewhere, somehow, we learn to react. We think it's just our own. I keep making this point.
And what is the Sanskrit word for extinguish?
What
Nirvana.
Oh, is that so? That's the
right.
Direct translation.
That's right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And we have, I mean, if we know anything about Sanskrit, we have a sense, an impression of nirvana. Peacefulness, calm. It's not a place, by the way. It's not heaven or anything like that. It is the extinction of suffering. Technically, the extinction of suffering. Ultimately, if we are able to extinguish all suffering within us, all of it completely, we have reached
a
nirvana.
State. Largely, it's the absence of something.
Yes.
That's really what it is. It's
suffering has been extinguished.
Reactivity, of compulsion, of obsession, of the things that we grab onto that ultimately cause a lot of suffering. Just have to let everybody know that we are spending the hour with Allan Lokos, the author of Patience, The Art of Peaceful Living, and Priscilla Warner, the author of Learning to Breathe, and we're discussing stress management, stress reduction, peace, peacefulness, and how to arrive in these delicious places and some of the causes they're in, so we can all have a more peaceful life, but not from adding something on top of an already neurotic or anxious condition, but rather by getting underneath and freeing ourselves up from the current condition in which we all find ourselves. I think that's another very important point that I like to make to my clients, which is that what is going on in you, while unique in its own particular, Baskin-Robbins flavor, is also something that is very human, and we're all experiencing it almost all the time. And there are windows of opportunity to shift it. But please know, in this way, Priscilla, and maybe this way only, you're not unique.
So with a professional therapist and with Priscilla, who's done obviously a lot of delving into this, I would be curious to know how, in your views, how much one can accomplish on one's own? How much progress can I make on my own?
Without the teachers and the therapists and the healers that I met, I couldn't have done a damn thing. I mean, so it depends on what you mean by your own. This was a very solitary process for me, and none of my friends meditate. My husband doesn't meditate. My kids. I was off on these adventures.
Was it considered
understood.
Odd to them from a cultural point of view?
No, I mean, I told them what I was doing, and some people were more interested than other people, but it was really hard, about 2/3 of the way through, and people would say, so what's new? And I'd say, you're just going to have to read the book. I mean, even close friends. I was burrowing the act of sitting still was bringing me so far deep inside of myself and my whole past and my whole narrative of who I was and other people's narratives of who I was, that it was impossible for me to explain to people what had become of me. And fortunately, I got to write this book. So people say to me, it was so honest and brave, and I didn't, what did you think when you set out to do it? Were you worried? And I thought, this was a need on my part. It was an extraordinary privilege to be able to be paid for having this incredible adventure. Minjer is not here anymore. He's wandering the Himalayas. So there was a part, and he had been in my heart for a long time. So when I first did the proposal, I said, I'm going to, study with the teachers that I've identified in the past. And he was the first most important person. And I Googled him, and he was coming to New York the day after my birthday. I was starting it from birthday to birthday. So, of course, that was perfect. And then I'm happy that nobody told me that he had gone, I don't know, wherever he is. Because when I first heard it, I got very emotional because I thought it was so important to me that he appeared in my life when he did. So that's a long answer to your question, that I could never have done this by myself.
I want to bring this back around, because to me, doing it alone is actually not the most important thing. Or I don't even mean having a therapist, but rather that you engaged in a path. If you had known, let's just say, about meditation, or another practice that I do and teach people is Tai Chi Chuan and Qi Kung. You could call them meditation in action, if you will. So you're already integrating the so-called outside world into a state that's more centered and relaxed. Would you have, do you think, struck out on the same path of suffering that you had, or experienced the same path, if you had had those as choices in your life? I try not to look back too much. I'm so bored with myself after this whole experience, I can't even tell you. I love meeting other people and hearing their stories, but I do look back occasionally when people ask me. And when I left after my first panic attack, and I called somebody at my house, and they came and picked me up, and I was really distraught. They called the family doctor, and he came over and paid a house call, which is what they did back then. And he took my vital signs, and he said to me, "You're just a little bit nervous." And he prescribed Librium, which is a tranquilizer, and a pretty strong one, I think, which was unusual for a 15-year-old back then. There was no Prozac. People weren't taking SSRIs. And I've thought to myself, what would have happened if that man had said to me, "I'm going to give you this meditation tape," guided imagery, because Belle Ruth Napperstack, she was able to take me to a place before I even began this process. And I don't have any anger towards him for giving me the medication that helped me so profoundly to function for many, many years. But I have wondered, if somebody had said to me, if either one of you lovely men had been the person who paid a house call, and I was in acute pain, and I don't know what would have been a good medication for me, but I don't. Medication or meditation?
Both.
Funny how they're so similar.
I talk about upping my meds now.
And mediation besides.
Yes, indeed.
So, I like to emphasize to people that although I had this opportunity to go and meet all these people personally, and to attend retreats, and they all have books, they all have downloads, they all have CDs. It's so possible in this day and age to have almost the experience of being on retreat. And I also talk to people about going on mini retreats. I've thought about, there's that message you can send in your email. People automate a message, I'm unable to respond to emails. Whatever. Sometimes I just want to say on retreat, and the people who will get it. And it could be retreat for 10 minutes, or it could be retreat for the weekend. But I think it's really important to give yourselves that kind of retreat. And you really, I couldn't have done this alone, but there are so many ways to be helped in this day and age.
Having just come back from retreat last night, I couldn't agree more. There was, for me, a significant point here, because I have some concern. I'm sure you both know meditation is very in right now. It's hard to pick up a magazine or a newspaper without an ad for all that meditation will do for you, cure you of this illness, cure you of that, you'll never go through this and that. It's significant to me that meditation was never intended for anything like this. It happens to be, I'll go to the other extreme. I think if you just stop and sit down. So I guess I'm saying to, whoever wants to listen to this, don't get frightened or thrown off by this word meditation, this kind of ooey stuff that comes from the East. Just think of stopping and sit down for 5 minutes. And what you're going to see is a change in what's going on within you. So, of course, we live in a society and a culture where things become commercialized very quickly. But the original goal, if there was such a thing as a goal for meditation, was really wisdom, to be able to see things more clearly. And out of that, a balance between wisdom and compassion, and ultimately to a state of being awake, being more in touch with what's really going on. But it does happen that if you just stop, sit down, don't meditate if that doesn't feel right. Just sit down and stop. Turn off the television, turn off the radio, turn off the cell phone, and let it be just you and the thoughts and feelings and sensations that are there. And know that you're okay with them, that you're absolutely safe.
What you're really also suggesting here, Allan, is that meditation isn't a doing as much as it's simply a being.
Absolutely.
And that's a space that most people in our society know very little of. And as you also well put your finger on, this idea that we commodify everything. There is a commercial aspect to almost everything. And I've been involved in this world for a long time, quite honestly, and I have watched from when I got my mantra in 1971 from TM, I have my mantra, and what that cost. I had to, wash a lot of dishes in a French restaurant for a long time to pay for that mantra. So, I mean, it entered the West that way as a commodity. But when you dig down deeper to the truer teachings, of course, you get what you're saying, which is that this is about awareness, this is about cultivation of wisdom and wakefulness. This isn't about a cure to a disease. That happens, by the way, on the way to wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, the research today is very clear, and there's unanimous agreement. And by the way, among researchers, unanimous agreement, this doesn't happen often. But we are being told that there is not an illness known that is not exacerbated by stress.
That's right.
So therefore, anything that reduces stress at any level is going to be beneficial.
It is good, no question. I'd like to turn for a moment, Priscilla, to you said that you were at Brown University, giving away lots of peas. But it was very funny that later on in your life, you had you fell in love with a neurophysiologist, a neuroscientist,
that's right.
who, by the way, had a relationship with peas.
You're the first person to point that out. That's brilliant.
You forgot someone you fell in love with.
No. I fell in love with Andy Newberg, and I said the reason I fell in love with him was because he's written several books about God and the brain.
Sure.
And he didn't like to eat peas as a child.
You
and
didn't
his
connect
mother,
the two.
Not at all.
Not
at all. Thank you.
It is my pleasure.
What a
No
day
accidents.
for you, right?
Yes, a day
I
of
want to say one
discovery.
other thought I had while you were talking too. But yeah, the pea thing, he said his mother, he didn't like peas, and his mother said to him, what about the poor other little peas on your plate that haven't been eaten? Won't they feel badly if you've eaten just some peas and not the others? Anyway, that was his first lesson in compassion.
So go visit them in the stomach.
So she goes to guilt to get him to eat his peas. Okay,
well, it
it
worked for him
works.
because then he became he's a lovely human being. He became very compassionate. He said he used to worry about leaving his glove, baseball glove out on the front porch all night long, that it would be alone, or the blocks. If he played with certain blocks, he was worried that other blocks would feel left out.
He generalized it.
But when you were describing that all you have to do is sit, when I was an art director in advertising, in the middle of a crazy day, and I know this happens, it's true for a lot of people, I would close my door, and I liked to work on the floor. I was kind of known for I'd have everything spread out around me. I didn't like a desk, and I think I always was looking to be grounded. So I think that natural, and people say to me, well, I don't know, I was pacing. And I'm like, pacing is a good thing. Pacing is walking meditation. There are all these human responses that our body gives us that we don't see as such.
Exactly. It's all a different frame.
They're gifts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you would pick up on that thread, because the work of Dr. Richard Davidson and others relative to the role of different kinds of neurochemicals released and meditation. You explore that in that wonderful chapter of yours, This is the Brain on Love.
Yes. Well, I had this, as I said, I was making stuff up as I went along. So I had the good fortune, my editor knew Andy Newberg. When I said, I want to know Dr. Andrew Newberg, she said, oh, I know Andy. I did a book with him. So she gave me his email. He couldn't have been nicer. Everybody who I approached in this experience, all these renowned people, they just said, sure. And Sharon Salzberg, I said, is it okay if I write about this experience I'm having? She said, sure. I said, do you want to know anything about me or anything? No. Do you want to see what I've written? No. So people were just, the path opened up to me. That's the wonderful thing, is that the path does open up. It just does. You don't really have to necessarily do anything. But so Andy, I called him, and he was very nice, and I said, I have this idea. I want to become a serene Tibetan monk, turn myself from neurotic Jew to serene Tibetan monk. So can you scan my brain in the beginning, and then I'm going to have all these adventures, and then you'll scan it at the end of the book? And he said, no, I can't do that, Priscilla. That's not a scientific study. It can only be at the most, 12 weeks, but probably an 8-week study. And he said, and to have validity, you can't do anything else. You can't do EMDR therapy, which changes your brain. I was on that time.
In other words, you needed to establish a baseline.
Totally. I was taking a certain amount of Klonopin, anti-anxiety medication at that time. I had to stay at the exact same dose. And he said to me, well, what meditation do you like the best? And at that point, I had just been turned on to metta or loving kindness. And I said, I think I really like loving kindness. And he said, well, don't do any loving kindness meditation until you see me. And, he did that first scan.
Take 2 in the morning and see me tomorrow.
And getting into an MRI machine in and of itself with a panic disorder was an interesting experience at my alma mater, coincidentally, where I'd had most of my panic attacks. University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Penn State. Right.
But he was able, the scans are in the book, and he talks much more eloquently than I do about the training effect that he can see by increased blood flow to certain parts of the brain. And my particular loving kindness meditation was interesting to him because different parts of the brain light up when you are, developing compassion. So that was interesting.
Right, exactly. So what we see is, of course, which is no surprise to us, that there are many physiological correlates to a mindfulness practice, awareness practice, vipassana, anything where we stop and we shift the consciousness, and that we understand that for every single thought is an emotion and a biochemical substrate, if you will. We're just about out of time, but I realized there was a question, Allan, that I really wanted to ask you, which had to do with a subject you talk about in your book on anger, and what is the role of anger from your point of view, because that stress, of course, I say to people all the time, you can have the greatest diet in the world, you can be really high on vitamin C and E and all the great antioxidants, but one flash of anger, bam, it is evaporated. So could you just speak in our last minute or two about that?
You're quoting Shantideva, aren't you? A single flash of anger destroys eons of...
I never said kalpas, but I had my own version of it, yeah.
Well, Shantideva, actually, the 8th century Indian scholar, in his major work, the 6th chapter, which is called Kanti, which we translate as patience, He doesn't even use the word patience until near the end of that chapter. He speaks immediately about anger. So he sees a direct correlation between impatience and anger. Early on, because I have been a student of Sharon Salzberg for years, we had an early on discussion about this, and she doesn't see it that way. She sees impatience as something that arises when we're waiting online at the supermarket, or in Sharon's case, waiting online at the airport, because she's always in airports. And anger is something that's quite different. Just briefly, the most significant thing is that these are both feelings. That's all they are. Don't characterize yourself by a feeling. We go right to, I'm an angry person. No, you're someone who experiences a feeling.
Disidentify.
If it arises more often than you would like, because it's not very pleasant to feel anger, then you want to address that. On this retreat that I just came back from, one of the things that we were speaking about is that anger and mindfulness cannot exist in the same moment. Interesting. So if I'm going to be mindful, I have left my feelings of anger, even just for a moment, to be able to take a look at what's going on.
Understood. Yeah. That's a very fine, mindful point to complete on today.
Good.
So I want to thank you both for being with me today here and discussing these very important, I think, pertinent subjects to our life on society these days. So thank you both, Allan Lokos and Priscilla Warner, for being here today.
Thank you, Mitchell. It was great.
Great. So glad.
Thank you.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us, and visit us at our website, where we also have a newsletter, a free newsletter, telling you about what we have on the air in a given week, and also a blog talking about worldly subjects of one sort or another at www.abetterworld.tv. That's www.abetterworld.tv. And also remember the book Patience and Learning to Breathe, and it's all on my website. Thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
This is PRN.FM, your source for progressive radio that makes a difference.
Love, Lust, and Laughter, Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm your host, Dr. Diana Wiley, a board-certified sex therapist and a marriage and family therapist. Guests are interviewed, and we sometimes dispense advice to create a format that is both informative and entertaining. If you can't listen live, go to the archives and rate the show on iTunes. The Progressive Radio Network is moving forward, and we hope that you are coming with us.
Are computers making us mutants?
How does the Milky Way fit inside your brain?
Are shamans the original superheroes?
Join the inquiry with Eric Davis
and Maja Daou
on Expanding Mind.
Each week we explore the cultures of consciousness with scholars and scientists, magicians and artists.
It's good to have an open mind,
but don't let your brains fall out.
Expanding Mind every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
And archived on the web at prn.fm.
The Progressive Radio Network is moving forward, and we hope you're coming with us.
Hi, this is Mike Rupert, host of the Lifeboat Hour, the #1 show on Progressive Radio Network, right behind our founder, Gary Null. Join us every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern for a soulful gut check on the status of our troubled planet and what you can do to try and adapt to it. This is from a nightclub at the end of the world. In the midst of heavy discussion, we also bring you a special and unique musical message from my band, New White Trash, and other very special artists. You can find all of our shows in the PRN archives for convenient listening at prn.fm. The Progressive Radio Network is moving forward, and we hope you're coming with us.
This is PRN.FM, giving you a daily progressive take on the world.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, and I'd like to welcome you to a special presentation of the Progressive Commentary Hour. The theme, vaccines. The questions for our panelists: are vaccines safe and effective? If so, what is the proof? Are vaccines not safe or effective, and what is the proof? Do vaccines give us lifetime immunity? Is vaccination the same as immunization? I have assembled a panel. Each will have an opportunity to address these issues in whatever way they choose. I will not interrupt them, as I believe in doing the commentary on the air approach, meaning this is a classroom. Let us all sit, take notes, and understand that these individuals, each of these are women doctors and scientists, have spent years investigating this in depth. They put their reputations on the line because they all offer legitimate challenges. We're going to begin with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. She is a physician who incorporates integrative medicine into her practice for treating allergies and childhood illnesses and women's health issues. She also is a person who has spent a great deal of time looking at the politics around vaccines and the impact of vaccines on public health and their medical risks in children. She is the author of 2 books, Fowl, Bird Flu, It Is Not What You Think, and Say No to Vaccines, a resource guide for all ages. She will be followed by Dr. Nancy Banks. Dr. Banks is a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist at Harvard Medical School, and she has had 25 years of practice in this field. She also has an MBA and conducts cutting-edge research in the history of medicine. So she is also the author of AIDS, Opium, and Diamonds, and Empire, the Deadly Virus of International Greed. She will be followed by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, board-certified nephrologist and an internist practicing in Bangor, Maine. And after witnessing several of her patients developing kidney failure following last season's H1N1 and seasonal flu vaccines, she undertook an investigation that alighted her into vaccine serious risks. She now focuses on educating physicians and other public health officials on the truth behind vaccines. The program will conclude with Dr. Merrill Nass, NASS, board-certified physician in internal medicine, practicing at the Mount Desert Island Hospital in Bar Harbor, Maine. And she also runs a clinic treating patients of Gulf War syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, fibromyalgia, and chronic fatigue. She is regarded an expert in biological warfare and bioterrorism, which she has been investigating for over 20 years. And she has testified on 4 separate occasions under oath before congressional committees. Now, our program. And again, I will not be interrupting our guest, as I want them to have every opportunity to take this discussion wherever they choose, providing that they are addressing the issues of, are vaccines safe? Are they effective? Are they not safe or effective? Lay out your case. Are vaccines the same as immunization? Because we call vaccines immunization. Are they indeed one and the same? What is the problem with natural immunization? What is the problem with all the vaccines? That is our story. Please join us now on the Progressive Commentary Hour. Welcome to our program, Dr. Tenpenny. My questions are simple. I will sit back with the audience and listen to your answers. Are vaccines safe and effective? If so, what proof do you have? Are they not safe or effective? If so, what is the proof? And discuss your experience with vaccines and what you consider the myths or misinformation around them. The forum is yours.
The whole issue of vaccine safety has been that we've always been told that vaccines are safe, but we've never really explored the other side. Are vaccines unsafe? Vaccine safety studies are short, they're inconclusive, they don't go on for a long period of time. All the studies are performed on children who are not ill, on no medications, and are by definition healthy. But once a vaccine is approved, it's been given to all children and all adults, even those who have been chronically sick and are on many different types of medications. So we really don't